Welcome to Disrupting Peace, a show about why peace hasn't worked and how it still could. I'm Bridget Conley, Research Director at the World Peace Foundation. This season, we've been focusing on the first steps that everyday people can take towards peace. And today, in our last episode of the season, we're going to see what we can learn from Nepal about the connections between emergency response, peace, and resilience. Now, as you know, Nepal is famous for its stunningly beautiful mountains. But many people don't know that there was a decade-long civil war there until 2006. We're not going to go into the details, but it's worth noting that natural disasters, like the earthquake that struck the country in 2015, can seriously test the fault lines within a society, especially one recovering from conflict. The results can be cooperation and coordination, or aggravated inequalities. For today's discussion, we're going to stay at the micro level and closely examine a collaboration between the Nepalese organization Lumanti and the MIT-based Urban Risk Lab. My guests today are Yatra Sharma and Larisa Ovalles. Yatra Sharma worked as an architect and urban developer with the Kathmandu-based Lumanti Support Group for Shelter, where she was the project coordinator for the project we'll discuss today. The nonprofit works to improve housing for the urban poor in Nepal. Today, she's a yoga teacher. Larisa Ovalles is a research scientist at MIT's Urban Risk Lab. She develops processes to increase emergency planning and preparedness at local and community levels. This includes developing alternative post-disaster housing solutions for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. And she was on the design team of the project in Nepal that we'll discuss today. In this conversation, we explore how one intentional rebuilding project in Nepal increased resilience and social cohesion in the town of Techo, why it's important that outside experts work closely with existing community organizations, and the possibilities that emerge when new technology meets ancient designs. Please note, this interview was recorded before the Gen Z-led uprising in Nepal that overthrew the government in September 2025. We'll include an updated message from Yatra after the conversation. All right, here's the interview. Yatra, Larisa, welcome to Disrupting Peace.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for having us.
So, as sort of an icebreaker, we're going to start with a guessing game that ties natural disasters to peace and conflict. I'm not expecting you to be experts, so you can just roll out your best guess. Okay, here's my first question. What earthquake, tsunami, and fire of 1755 destroyed a city and undermined Portugal's role as an imperial power?
I mean, my guess might be somewhere in Southeast Asia. Japan, maybe Indonesia.
No, it was actually back in the metropole. It was the Lisbon earthquake, tsunami, and fire. Okay, a second one. According to many experts, did the 2004 tsunami in Aceh province help or hinder peace negotiations with guerrillas there?
Help, I guess.
Yeah, that would be my
Yes.
guess also.
You are both correct. In the aftermath of the tsunami, increased international pressure and the need to rebuild increased the chances for peace. Okay, so thank you for playing my guessing game. There was a point behind these obscure historical questions. Natural disaster response can either improve, as we saw with Aceh, chances for peace, or worsen them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're going to turn to a study of Nepal to understand what makes the difference, right? How can response improve or worsen social relations? But I want to start in the wake of the earthquake in 2015. Yatra, you and the organization you worked with at the time, Lumanti, had already been working to improve housing conditions for the urban poor in the town of Techo in the Kathmandu Valley. Can you describe how the earthquake impacted Techo?
The community that we worked in, this is a very small and quaint and beautiful traditional settlement full of traditional housing made of mud bricks and wood and those kind of structures. So 80% of the houses were damaged because they were old houses, and it completely disrupted the entire community. They all had to run away from the houses and shelter in tents in their agricultural fields as they saw their houses crumbling down into debris. So it was a complete chaos. Lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of water supply, lack of electricity, complete insecurity. That was the condition then, the initial stage.
And I assume that the economic burdens of rebuilding were enormous. But beyond just finances, what were some of the community level challenges involved in rebuilding?
Of course, the finance was the biggest. But land was another very big issue. A natural disaster like that always brings an opportunity to rebuild completely fresh and anew. So, when there was an opportunity to completely rebuild a city, the elderly generation and the younger generation clashed, where the elderlies wanted to conserve the city as it was, the town as it was before, whether the young ones wanted to make it a completely newly planned city in a very modern manner. So that was a clash that was happening. However, the biggest technical challenge was the land ownership, because the community had been settling in that area for almost more than 1,000 years. People did not have proper legal demarcations of their land, and they had to rebuild. So, who owned which part of the town and how much of the land did they own was all blurred, like nobody knew. So, that was a really big chaos at that time.
And what was your immediate goal? What was Lumanti working on after the earthquake?
So, can I start by saying how Lumanti was working before the earthquake?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Lumanti is an organization that works with urban poor communities. What Lumanti does is it goes to cities or small towns like Techo and gathers women together on a very community level and sits with them on a very informal level, like just a chat, starting with a chat in a roadside, or maybe just calling a meeting in some small town hall or something like that. And they start setting up this microfinance saving in a very informal manner. And with the help of these savings, the women are able to upgrade their housing. They also use the same money for various other things, like invest in small businesses. Maybe they buy a few chicken and then they start up their chicken like poultry business. Or maybe they buy a small cart where they start selling street foods, anything like that. So in Techo, Lumanti started with something like 500 Nepali rupees. And I think that would be closely around $5 in US savings.
So and very small amounts.
Very, very small amount, like some pocket money they have collected from their husband or saved from whatever. And now it's unimaginable, like currently the Techo micro saving is above 10 million rupees, which is over $100,000.
Wow.
Really? That's amazing. And that grew from about $5. Can you say more about how the funds grow?
Yeah, it is all from the community. It starts with maybe like 10 women who take the risk. And then when the others see that these first 10 investors or the savers have now started growing business and have started growing savings, and they get pulled in by these effects. It's completely like a banking system, but on a micro level. Just the scale of investments and returns are lower than the banks. So that is what Lumanti had been already working with Techo women before the earthquake. So Lumanti had already established its very good rapport within Techo, and Techo women, they were like really good leaders. And so when the earthquake happened, Lumanti went right away and started supporting with aids they got from the donors. So there were a lot of international donors that were pouring out all these aids to Nepal through different NGOs. And then through Lumanti, the aids were distributed. The aids initially were in the form of water and basic food and tent supplies. And then after that, the second phase was supply of tin sheets and wooden planks for temporary shelters. And in the third stage, like after 6 months, more donations came in the form of housing investment, like actual money to build the houses back in their land. And Lumanti mobilized these women, the very women that were already acting as leaders within the community. Lumanti mobilized the money to rebuild around 224 houses in Techo.
That's amazing work. And you can already hear, Yatra, and what you're saying, that there are all these phases. I want to fast forward us to 2017 and turn to Larisa. MIT's Urban Risk Lab first became involved in the post-earthquake reconstruction effort, the rebuilding in Nepal that year. Can you tell us more about the Urban Risk Lab?
Yes, of course. The Urban Risk Lab is a research lab of researchers and students from mainly architecture, urban planning, urbanism, computer science, social sciences, working together to embed disaster preparedness and risk reduction into our built environment and our communities.
Yeah, so how did the Risk Lab get involved in Nepal, and how are these ideas applied to that moment that Yatra was explaining when rebuilding of structures was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us not to immediately go right as there's such urgency and chaos immediately after a disaster. So as to not to add to the chaotic environment as well. But after the 2015 earthquake, our great team did a lot of field work and eventually saw the work that Lumanti was already doing and started a great conversation and partnership with them to identify what were the most important needs at the time and how embedding disaster preparedness infrastructure within the community can help in recovery, but also for any future disaster emergency need, but also meet any everyday need that was already present. The project itself revolved around a structure called the Pati.
Yatra, can you tell us what is a pati? The structure that MIT collaborated with you to renovate?
So, party is basically a rest house, and rest houses are like semi covered spaces built on a platform, and it has a beautiful roofing structure. It could have like a two-way slope or a three-way slope with beautifully carved wooden pillars, and they are usually brick exposed structures and with just a single wall on the back. And they're really, really beautiful. Every architect in the world would love the kind of architecture that happens at Kathmandu Valley. And even the urban planning is beautifully designed. The towns are designed in a way to bring a social cohesion. So there are cross sections of streets. And there are no dead ends in the town planning. There is no road leading to a dead end house or anything like that. And what happens in most of the junctions of the streets is people tend to meet and maybe they play, they sit, they chat. Maybe they even soak up the sun, dry their vegetables. Resting is another activity that they do. They can worship the deity that has been located within the party. The kids can play, the elderly can sit and chat with each other. That is a party, and it is a very important, a vibrant aspect of the traditional cities.
So, Larissa, at these patis, then these centers of community, why did you choose that section, or you and your colleagues, as part of a emergency preparedness site? And what did you do? How did you make it that?
Yeah, it holds such an important role within the community itself, even regardless of emergency or disaster preparedness in general. And we see this also with some of our previous research in other countries. Like, for example, in Japan, shrines also hold a familiarity and a sort of presence within the community. And usually they're located on higher ground. So when people need to evacuate for a tsunami or something's happening, they're already familiar and know where to go because they have a kind of mental map that these are places that are part of daily life. So similarly, patis already have a kind of social and cultural significance. And in moments of chaos and emergency, usually people have very little capacity to learn or figure out something new, right? You usually go to a place that you're already familiar with and frequent regularly.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Usually sometimes outside organizations or even architects will just look for a site that's just not convenient, and then nobody ends up going there because it doesn't have a kind of community tie in the similar way. And the other key part of it was learning that water was a huge need outside of disasters, also just sort of like daily need and a sort of daily struggle, mainly for women that have to go and collect water, and a lot of the water was contaminated. So it became clear that water was something that we ended up focusing on, trying to bring clean water and accessibility of water into the structure as well.
So how did you do that? Did you created a water filtration system as part of renovating this space?
Yeah, and I think for this project, it was important to still care for the past while still having certain modifications that would be improvements to the existing structure. So it wasn't completely demolishing the pati because it was damaged, but it was restoring it in a careful way to still maintain its tradition and cultural importance, but embedding within it water infrastructure or other things that would be more resilient for any future event that happened.
Right. So both improving the day-to-day life as well, but also having everything you would need in this hub that I assume, although I'll ask, was built then to resist future earthquakes, ideally, right?
Yes, yes, it was. Especially the roof design was modified very well by the MIT design group. They suggested lighter structures on the roof so that in the future, if an earthquake was ever to happen, we have lighter structures which will not, fall down or collapse that easily. In fact, it is going to be very safe. So the structure itself has given the community that sense of security that if our houses will tumble down, the party will not.
So it's a beautiful collaboration. Obviously, this is one incredibly well-designed and well-considered contribution to the rebuilding. I'm sure it has a limited impact, right, as one structure in this mass, but was there something special about this project?
I think when the entire community was concerned about building their own houses, everybody was like, my house first, snatching the designers, snatching the finances first, snatching the contractors and builders first, getting the supplies first, whatever first. And suddenly, nobody is focused on the public areas, the public infrastructures. 2015, the earthquake happened, and 2017, we're talking about 2 long years of being forgotten about the public spaces. And now, suddenly, MIT is showing interest in revitalizing a public space. And people are like questioning, is it necessary at this moment? And Lumanti comes in and says, of course, let's do it together. And we convinced the community, and MIT had really good plans. So when we started rebuilding this party, it started coming out looking really, really nice. And what, attracts people is beauty, the external beauty. And when it started looking beautiful, it made people happy about the open spaces once again. And the impact that it had was that the other parties around the towns started getting rebuilt. People started realizing that, yes, of course, these spaces needed to breathe once again. And apart from that, the innovation that the water tank could be housed underneath, they could be like a supply of rescue materials, and people could get access to drinkable water right from the tap. That was something completely new. And it sort of brought that sense of revitalization into the community. And it actually brought people back together in the open spaces instead of being inside the house constantly. Sometimes, small things make great impacts. And this was one really, really beautiful example.
Yeah, I think also from our perspective, we saw the potential of it scaling, right? Like patis are throughout the Kathmandu Valley. So if we were able to show, even with one prototype of like, hey, this is the potential that could extend past this one pati or this one community. And it was also interesting to hear Yatra, right? Like difference of perspective in terms of the kind of individualism versus the collective, because I think that also happens to different degrees in different spaces. There is this idea, I mean, even here in the States and in other countries, right? Like, what you need to do to prepare is you have to have your emergency backpack. But as we know, I don't know, I've worked on this now for a while and I don't have an emergency backpack. So I don't know what that says about me or us in general. But, most people won't have their own, quote unquote, preparedness backpack. But there is a potential of using these collective and community spaces or structures as the community's preparedness backpack, right? And bring back that attention into collective space or community space.
Okay. Larisa, I want you to tell me more about your lack of a go bag. You're an expert in this field. What's going on?
I know. I have been working in this field now for 10 years plus, and obviously have been exposed to the importance of being prepared. But I use myself as an example as to I don't even have my own to-go bag or preparedness bag. And I think it points to the majority of people. If I don't have one, the majority of people also don't have one. So how can we rethink what preparedness looks like for the majority of people, right? And I think a lot of governments point to a to-go bag or downloading an app. Nobody's going to download another app on their phone or forget to. Usually to-go bags are also expensive for the most part. You usually, even if you have one, you kind of forget where it is. So in case of an emergency, you're not going to be digging through your closet to find your to-go bag. So, to me, it's just how can we build on things that already people have or do to create more preparedness. One of our other projects really focuses on not downloading another app, but instead working with apps that people already have on their phone. So the project's called Risk Map. If your house is flooding in the moment, you're not going to be like, wait, hold on, let me download an app and figure out what to do. But instead, it uses WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, apps that are already on your phone to be able to collect important flood data from people. It's kind of a small example of you're not forcing people to do something, but what is it that people already do? Because in a moment of an emergency, people are just going to do what they do. Yeah.
Okay, but I don't want to be irresponsible with our listeners. Are you saying that they shouldn't have a go bag?
Yeah, if you're able to and have the resources to get a go bag, of course, it's better to have one. Yeah.
Noted. Okay, turning back to Nepal. Yatra, the project was completed in, I think, 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I am very glad that you have not had to use it as earthquake response since then. But do you know what's happened to it in the interim years?
Okay. So I recently had a talk with the local community leaders, the women, we call them Didis, elder sisters. So I called the Didis in the community and they told me that this summer there was a lot of water shortage in the community. The water finished up very quickly, the water stored. But what happened was the municipality, the government, they sent trucks, the tankers to this party, the storage tank. They poured it down into the water tank and they also bought a motor with the money that was provided left over as a part of the project. There was a little budget left for management budget. So that money was utilized to buy a motor water pump. And they supplied water to every single house with the help of this entire network of government and the tankers and the motors and the community, and everybody had water this summer. It is because of that water tank. So that is the recent, great use. The party is so beautiful. There have been some TikTok shootings, some really popular ones that got viral. And there was some song being sang about Techo. There's some very motivational Techo song, apparently, which did a lot of shooting in that place. And not exactly in that party, Larissa, I'm sorry, but there was another party, I think like a 5 minutes walk from that one, which was rebuilt inspired by this particular one. And actually, me and a friend of mine have done a little dance shooting in front of the other party.
That's amazing. For our listeners, we will definitely link to these videos in the show notes. Larissa, how does this fit in with MIT's goals for the project?
I mean, that's ideal for us as a lab, right? Is that it can carry on and it serves to sort of prove how the patis can be restored. And if it scales and other people jump into, working on other patis, that's a success story for us for sure.
Yeah, and another scale-up thing as such is that I worked on another project in another settlement, very similar to Techo after this project. It's a place called Bungamati. When I was working with Lumanti, me and the team of Lumanti, we decided that we should at least, make another version of this party in Bungamati as well. So yeah, it has actually been scaled to some level. Not exactly the way this party was with the water tank and everything, but carry on that very idea of, revitalizing a public space and something that could be made safer, and that's something that could be more accessible, something that could look really aesthetically pleasing, and that bring people together. That was the idea. So we actually did that twice through Lumanti.
That's fantastic. I have a question I'd like to hear both of you answer. So this season, we're exploring the first steps people can take to build peace in their own communities, right, as individuals. And I'm curious if you reflect on the example of this collaboration and also think about your own lives. Do you think there are any insights for people on what would be the first step that someone could take in the wake of or in preparing for natural disaster that would help move towards the kind of response that happened here, right? A response that builds social cohesion and creates space for people to come together. Yatra, what do you think? What are some things people can do as a first step?
I think the biggest learning is let us stop encroaching public spaces. They are so important in times of disaster. There are big land mafias and all sort of things that are grabbing onto public lands and government lands and building big investments, commercial investments. So that should really, really stop. Open spaces are a must. They are the backbone for community cohesion.
Yeah, that's a great thing. And everyone can look at that in their own communities. Larissa, what about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever I tell people that I work in disaster preparedness and climate change resiliency, there's always a kind of whoa, yeah, I mean, this is, how does one start to tackle such a big issue? And I think, the problem is too big for any one person. So there's a little bit of just overall overwhelm that happens, I think, or a sense of sometimes even cognitive dissonance of well, it's going to happen anyway, so I'll just give up and continue living my life. And I think there's a lot of examples of how to tackle the issue, not from all the way up here, but just start from your own community and learning from what existing efforts and is already happening. I think that's the sort of first line of response usually in a lot of communities, especially if there is mistrust in government and not being able to rely on government. A lot of the disaster response actually relies on the community itself. And then I think as an architect and kind of urban planner, I think there has been slowly a shift for us as a discipline in general to be more engaged in disaster preparedness, and usual approaches to it have been very top-down or very engineering-focused solutions. So architects and urban planners have a lot of responsibility to engage in it and think about how our built environment, our public spaces, and our just overall cities are able to respond to disasters and climate change in general.
The shifting of the way the architects work, I think that's really, really important because Lumanti works with a lot of architects and urban planners, but we call ourselves community architects and we rarely design things on our own. We are the kind of architects that actually don't need to really think or create, because, sometimes when we are trained as an architect for 5 years plus or whatever, we sort of think of ourselves as, that somebody who has to create and we have to like really, channelize our creativity from inside and we have to bring out this beautiful thing into this world. But the idea of being a community architect is that you don't really have to create, you just have to listen to the people. And when you listen to the people, the designs are just there. You just have to coordinate a little bit and make things fall into place a little bit more logically and make it maybe do a little bit of touch up to make it things aesthetical and maybe just program the whole construction process in a sequence and deliver it in a slightly more aesthetic way. That's all we need to do. Otherwise, the design and the creativity is already there. And listening to the people is the way to go, I guess. And that's where the solutions are always there from the people. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
I think the shift is happening all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Those were wonderful answers from both of you. The final question, and I feel like you guys have already begun to tackle this question. So we always end with an exercise we call collective dreaming. And we always start by looking back into the past. And I wanted to take the example of the last really big earthquake in Nepal, which was in 1934, right? The previous one before the one that we've been speaking about. And at that time, it was estimated that over 10,000 people lost their lives. That was 91 years ago. And so if we can think 91 years into the future, so you've got some time to play with, imagine it is the year 2116. Imagine that communities are more cohesive, stable, and peaceful even when disasters occur. What are the steps we need to take today in order to get to those more prepared and resilient communities in the future?
When I think about it, and part of it we maybe addressed a little bit is a lot of the steps are already there. And it might just be being able to support the already existing efforts. So we can learn from each other, right? Even if we're across the globe. There are beautiful examples of how people have addressed disasters historically, that it's not reinventing something new, but it's already existing, and being able to allocate the appropriate resources to scale up or sort of for them to continue to have the impact that they do 100 years from now still.
That's a great answer. And I think this collaboration is a perfect example of that. Yatra, how would you respond? What do we need to do today to get to this more resilient, peaceful future?
I'm thinking in terms of, creating more emotional resilience within people. I think we are starting to get a lot more dependent on technology with AI coming up and everything, like the only risk I see for the future is that we might be too independent to start thinking for ourselves. If something like that was to happen, and if all the systems that we have created, all the technologies that we have created, they all fall apart, they collapse, then will humans then be able to think for themselves? And that's what's going in my mind right now.
Yeah, we hear you over here. That is a question we're all struggling with.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we see this after every event, right? There's already inherent sort of wanting to help others that's there, that we see over and over again. After every disaster, people do want to be able to help your neighbor or help a neighboring country. When Mexico comes in to help with the wildfires in California, like I think there's already that need, even at the personal level or more at the state level, of sort of helping your neighbor. So I think ideally, if that continues to happen, or it happens at a much bigger and larger scale, then I think we can be there 100 years from now.
Yeah, so rebuild those ties. Yatra, did you have Anything else you wanted to add to your response?
No, I totally love Larissa's answer because I think it's about human capacity and human emotions and connections between humans. Anyways, it's just hoping that the technologies will not make human race very individual. That's all I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I would love to invest in all of these ideas emotionally, intellectually, and financially. Those are fantastic response structures and community building practices. So thank you for sharing your time, your ideas, and for joining me today.
Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
In the weeks since we recorded this episode, Nepal has been in the news. Thankfully, not for a natural disaster, but because of political events in September 2025. Young people, largely Gen Zers, were increasingly frustrated with income inequality, unemployment, and lack of opportunity. When the government cracked down on social media, these young people responded with large-scale protests and eventually forced a change in government. In the days of the uprising, Yatra shared her reflections in an email on September 13th, which I'll read. Quote, "For now, we are all in a state of awe and hope, and also utterly amazed by the power of youth, Gen Z, who are known to be glued to the screen and yet came out on the streets and rapidly revolutionized the state. A much-needed change happened. The political context has been filled with corruption for long, but we millennials were way too quiet, accepting business as usual and assuming we are powerless. I'm simultaneously in awe of the value of digital connection in bringing quick change. There's a lot of hope from the newly elected Prime Minister. Let's hope for a bright future for Nepal." Thank you, Yatra. It's clear that collective action is far from outdated just because new media is rising. Hopefully, this episode also reminds us that having real, physical, communal spaces is essential. These spaces not only improve emergency response and everyday quality of life, but strengthen communities. We plan this season to be about the first steps that individuals can take towards peace. But what we've been hearing again and again is that if we want peace, we need strong communities. And we need to work collectively. Thanks for listening to Disrupting Peace. I'm Bridget Conley. And thank you to Yatra Sharma and Larisa Ovalles for joining me today. You can learn more about Lumanti and watch the videos Yatra mentioned at the links in our show notes. You can learn more about the MIT Urban Risk Lab at urbanrisklab.org. This is our last episode of the season, but for those of you who want more inspiration, keep an eye out for bonus episodes coming over the next few months. We'll bring back some of our favorite episodes from past seasons and introduce you to a few podcasts we love. Stay tuned. By the way, we'd love to hear your feedback as we start planning for season 4. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next by emailing us at disruptingpeacepodcast@gmail.com. That's disruptingpeacepodcast@gmail.com. Disrupting Peace is a production of the World Peace Foundation. Find out more at worldpeacefoundation.org. You can find us on Blue Sky at worldpeacefdtn.bsky.social. You can also find us on Instagram at worldpeacefdtn. The show is produced by myself and Emily Shaw, engineering by Jacob Winnick and Asia Simpson, marketing and social media by Kaylin Song, show artwork by Simon Fung. Special thanks to Jeremy Helton, my colleagues Lisa Avery, B. Arneson, and Alex Duvall, and the team from the Tufts Digital Design Studio, including Kimberly Lynn Ferrero-Arnias and Miles Donovan. Okay, until next time, stay skeptical and hopeful.